Imagine for a moment an alternate reality, a world where the elegant, minimalist design of an Apple MacBook is powered by the undisputed king of graphics and AI, Nvidia. What if the iPhone in your pocket contained a custom-designed Nvidia GPU, making it the most powerful gaming device on the planet? This world almost existed. Apple and Nvidia should have been natural partners, a titan of consumer electronics and a titan of silicon, united to dominate the industry. Instead, they are bitter rivals, locked in a cold war for over a decade. So, what happened? How did a relationship that once held so much promise collapse into one of Silicon Valley's most infamous and permanent divorces? This is the secret history of the great divorce between Apple and Nvidia. It's a story that goes far beyond a simple business dispute. It's a tech soap opera, driven by microscopic manufacturing flaws that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, a clash between two of the most powerful egos in the industry, and a betrayal that forced Apple to embark on a decade-long quest to control its own destiny. A quest that would ultimately lead to the creation of Apple Silicon and change the face of computing forever. To understand the breakup, you first have to understand the marriage. In the early 2000s, the PC market was a different landscape. Apple was in the middle of its great comeback, led by the return of Steve Jobs. But for its high-end Pro machines to truly compete, they needed best-in-class graphics performance. At the time, the standard integrated graphics chips supplied by Intel were notoriously underpowered. They were a bottleneck, incapable of handling the demanding tasks required by Apple's core audience of creative professionals, the video editors, 3D animators, and designers. Apple needed a partner with serious graphical muscle. Enter Nvidia. As the inventor of the graphics processing unit, GPU, Nvidia was the undisputed performance king. The partnership began in 2001 when Apple included Nvidia's GeForce 2 MX in the Power Mac G4 and offered the groundbreaking GeForce 3 as a high-end option. At an event in Tokyo, Steve Jobs himself declared that the two companies had a great relationship. The years between 2006 and 2008 marked the high point of the collaboration. Apple's most powerful and prestigious machines proudly featured Nvidia's top-tier GPUs, cementing their Pro status. The 2007 and 2008 MacBook Pro models, for instance, were equipped with the formidable Nvidia GeForce 8600 MGT GPU. This was a major selling point. Contemporary reviews hailed it as one of the best notebook graphics cards available, giving professionals the power they needed for demanding applications and even allowing for high-end gaming, provided they booted into Windows using Boot Camp. For desktop professionals, the early 2008 Mac Pro offered the Nvidia GeForce 8800 GT as a build-to-order option, a significant leap in performance over the stock ATI card. With 512 megabytes of dedicated GDDR3 memory, it was a beast for its time. The partnership culminated in the revolutionary unibody MacBook Pro of late 2008. This machine featured an innovative dual GPU system. For everyday tasks, it used the integrated Nvidia GeForce 9400M to conserve power. But with a click, users could switch to the powerful discrete GeForce 9600M GT for graphics-intensive work. The performance difference was staggering. Real-world tests showed the 9600 MGT was anywhere from 121% to 286% faster than its integrated sibling, in some cases nearly tripling the frame rates in games. Reviews from influential outlets like Ars Technica and Macworld celebrated this leap in graphics capability, solidifying the MacBook Pro's reputation as a true professional workhorse. This golden age was more than just a convenient supplier relationship. It was a strategic necessity for Apple. The company's entire Pro identity was built on delivering elite performance. Without Nvidia's powerful GPUs, Apple's most expensive machines would have been crippled by Intel's lackluster integrated graphics, unable to deliver on their central brand promise. This deep reliance is what made the coming betrayal so catastrophic. Beneath the surface of this successful partnership, a microscopic flaw was spreading, a ticking time bomb that would blow the relationship to pieces. The crisis, which would come to be known as Bumpgate, centered on a generation of Nvidia's mobile GPUs, specifically the G84 and G86 chips used in millions of laptops sold by Apple, Dell, and HP. The problem wasn't with the silicon die itself, but with the packaging that surrounded it. To connect the GPU die to the circuit board, manufacturers used tiny balls of solder, known in the industry as bumps. In this case, the specific material formulation used for these bumps and the underfill material around them was faulty. Laptops endure constant thermal stress, the cycle of heating up during use and cooling down when turned off. This expansion and contraction puts mechanical strain on the chip's components. The materials Nvidia used were not robust enough to withstand this cycle, causing microscopic cracks to form in the solder bumps over time. The result for the user was a graphical nightmare. It would start with glitches and artifacts on the screen and eventually lead to total hardware failure. Multi-$1,000 MacBook Pros were becoming expensive paperweights. The scale of the failure was immense. In a July 2008 filing, Nvidia publicly acknowledged the problem, taking an initial charge of $150 million to $200 million to cover the anticipated warranty and repair costs. But that was just the beginning. The costs continued to mount as more and more machines failed. By 2010, Nvidia had spent a staggering $450 million on costs related to the defective chips. For Apple, it was a disaster. The company's brand is built on quality and reliability, and now its flagship professional laptops were failing at an alarming rate. Apple was forced to launch its own costly and embarrassing extended warranty program, offering free logic board replacements for affected MacBook Pro models for up to 4 years after purchase. At the time, these repairs could easily cost between $310 and $400 per unit, a significant financial burden. But for Steve Jobs, the real damage wasn't financial. It was the betrayal. According to former Apple employees, the company was infuriated that Nvidia refused to fully compensate them for the recall costs. Nvidia reportedly saw Apple as a smaller, less important customer. It only offered a paltry $10 million to Dell after the PC giant threatened to pull all of its business, a clear signal to Apple that it was not a priority. This was the moment the trust shattered. Nvidia's defective product and its subsequent handling of the crisis had damaged Apple's brand, cost it a fortune, and violated the fundamental trust required in a high-stakes supplier relationship. The divorce was now inevitable. While Bumpgate was the event that triggered the breakup, the root cause ran much deeper. The conflict was ultimately a clash of two fundamentally incompatible philosophies, embodied by two of Silicon Valley's most powerful and strong-willed leaders, Steve Jobs and Jensen Huang. Steve Jobs' entire worldview was built on the principle of absolute control. His strategy, known as vertical integration, dictated that Apple should own and control every critical part of the user experience, from the custom silicon inside the device, to the operating system it ran, to the retail store where it was sold. He believed that insanely great products could only emerge from this end-to-end integration, where every component was perfectly optimized to work together. This philosophy extended to his suppliers. Jobs was legendarily demanding, pushing partners to their absolute limits by setting what seemed like impossible targets. He obsessed over details others would ignore and had a binary view of the world. You were either a genius or a bozo, an ally or an obstacle. A now famous anecdote from around 2001 perfectly illustrates his style. In a meeting with a senior Nvidia executive, Jobs accused the company of copying technology from Pixar, the animation studio he then controlled. When the executive dared to push back, Jobs simply pretended the Nvidia executive was no longer in the room for the remainder of the meeting. To Jobs, suppliers were meant to be compliant cogs in his perfectly engineered machine, not partners with their own agendas. Jensen Huang, Nvidia's co-founder and CEO, had a completely different vision. A Taiwanese immigrant who famously started his company at a Denny's restaurant, Huang is known for his relentless work ethic and his ability to make bold, long-term strategic bets. His goal was never just to sell components. It was to build Nvidia into a powerful horizontal platform that would dominate an entire layer of the technology stack. His masterstroke was CUDA, Compute Unified Device Architecture. In the early 2000s, Huang bet over $1 billion on developing this proprietary software platform. CUDA unlocked the immense parallel processing power of Nvidia's GPUs for tasks beyond graphics, turning them into engines for scientific computing and eventually artificial intelligence. It created a powerful ecosystem, locking developers into Nvidia's hardware and giving the company immense leverage over the entire PC industry. Unlike Jobs, who wanted his suppliers to be invisible, Huang was obsessed with building the Nvidia and GeForce brands into household names. He wanted consumers to walk into a store and demand the PC with Nvidia inside, making his company a celebrated ingredient, not a silent partner. These two philosophies were on a collision course. Jobs demanded custom-designed chips that met his exacting standards for power consumption and heat, viewing Nvidia as a simple component maker. Huang, focused on his grand platform strategy, was unwilling to dedicate significant resources to create low-margin, custom chips for a single demanding customer who wasn't even in his top 10 by sales volume. The relationship was fundamentally broken long before the first chip failed. Apple saw Nvidia as an arrogant and inflexible supplier. Nvidia saw Apple as a difficult, low-priority customer. Bumpgate wasn't the cause of the divorce. It was merely the catalyst that made the irreconcilable differences impossible to ignore any longer. The fallout from Bumpgate was swift and decisive. The divorce papers were signed, and Apple began systematically erasing Nvidia from its future. After a brief and reportedly troubled attempt to return to Nvidia GPUs in 2012, Apple made a permanent switch to Nvidia's arch-rival, AMD. The first major product to signal this new era was the iconic 2013 Mac Pro. Nicknamed the trash can for its radical cylindrical design, it shipped exclusively with dual AMD FirePro professional graphics cards. This was a clear and public declaration. The Nvidia era was over. From that point on, all of Apple's high-end machines, from the 5K iMac introduced in 2014 to subsequent generations of the MacBook Pro, would rely solely on AMD for their discrete graphics needs. But switching suppliers was just a temporary fix. The real, long-term consequence of the Bumpgate trauma was that it solidified a mantra deep within Apple's culture. Never again. Never again would Apple's product roadmap, its brand reputation, and its bottom line be held hostage by an unreliable third-party component supplier. The only way to guarantee control was to build it themselves. The seeds of this revolution were planted even before the crisis peaked. In April 2008, just a few months before Nvidia's public disclosure of the faulty chips, Apple made a quiet but momentous acquisition, purchasing the chip design firm PA Semi for $278 million. This move, which largely went unnoticed at the time, was the foundational step in Apple's decade-long journey towards silicon independence. Bumpgate provided the ultimate justification and a powerful sense of urgency to accelerate the plan. The PA Semi team formed the nucleus of Apple's new in-house silicon division, led by Johnny Srouji, who had joined Apple from Intel and IBM in 2008. Their first major creation was the A4 chip, which debuted in the original iPad in 2010. This was the beginning of the A series, a line of custom mobile processors that would quickly become the gold standard for performance and efficiency, leaving competitors in the dust. For 10 years, Apple honed its chip design prowess in the iPhone and iPad. The final act came in November 2020 with the launch of the M1 chip, Apple's first custom-designed system-on-a-chip for the Mac. This was the culmination of the strategy born from the ashes of 2008. By integrating the CPU, GPU, and memory into a single, highly efficient package, Apple achieved a level of performance per watt that no traditional PC manufacturer could match. The M1 chip wasn't just a technical marvel, it was the ultimate revenge. It was the final decisive act in a long war for independence, ensuring Apple would never again be at the mercy of a supplier's failures or a partner's conflicting agenda. While the narrative of an Apple betrayed is compelling, the story has two sides. The divorce was not without its costs, and from Nvidia's perspective, walking away from Apple may have been the smartest decision they ever made. From Nvidia's point of view, Apple was a notoriously difficult and demanding customer. They insisted on custom designs, pushed for razor-thin margins, and represented a relatively small fraction of the overall PC market. Apple never even cracked Nvidia's top 10 list of customers by revenue. Jensen Huang's strategic vision was focused on a much larger prize: building a horizontal platform that would dominate the entire industry. Pouring billions into the CUDA ecosystem and capturing the massive Windows gaming market was a far more lucrative long-term bet than dedicating precious engineering resources to a demanding, low-volume partner like Apple. In hindsight, this strategy was spectacularly successful, paving the way for Nvidia's current dominance in the multi-trillion-dollar AI industry. For over a decade, Apple's decision to abandon Nvidia had a significant downside for its most demanding professional users. By aligning exclusively with AMD, Apple's ecosystem was locked out of CUDA. CUDA quickly became the undisputed industry standard for GPU-accelerated computing. Professional applications crucial for 3D rendering, scientific research, and machine learning, like Adobe's Premiere Pro and After Effects, were heavily optimized for CUDA's architecture. This meant that for many years, a Mac user running a high-end AMD card would often get inferior performance compared to a Windows user with a comparable Nvidia card. This CUDA gap created a significant disadvantage for the Mac in the high-performance computing world, pushing many creative professionals and researchers toward Windows-based PCs. Ultimately, the split was likely inevitable, driven by the incompatible corporate DNA of the two giants. Apple's obsession with vertical integration and total control could never coexist with Nvidia's ambition to build a universal, horizontal platform. The divorce, while painful, forced each company to double down on its core philosophy. For Nvidia, it meant an unwavering focus on the PC and data center markets, allowing CUDA to flourish and become the bedrock of the AI revolution. For Apple, the trauma of supplier dependency fueled the creation of its in-house silicon division, which has become its single greatest competitive advantage, delivering a level of hardware-software integration that no rival can replicate.